The Grand Council chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive structure that held the hopes and fears of 200 different alien species. Today, the chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone knew what was coming. They were going to talk about humans. Cale Thorne stood at the center platform, his blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. He was a Viridian, a species known for careful thought and precise words. His people had been part of the Galactic Federation for over 3,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed wars that consumed entire star systems, but in all that time, nothing had prepared them for humanity. The diplomat looked around the massive chamber. Beings of every shape and size filled the seats. Some had tentacles, others had wings. Some breathed oxygen, others required methane atmospheres and sat in special containment fields. Despite their differences, they all shared one thing today. They were all worried about the newest members of the Federation. Ambassador Lisa Morgan sat in the human delegation section. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with short brown hair and calm eyes. Next to her, Commander Jake Bennett wore his Earth Defense Fleet uniform with pride. Both of them had known this day would come. The other species needed answers. They needed to understand what humanity really was. Cale Thorne began to speak. His voice was translated instantly into 200 different languages by the Chamber's advanced systems. Honored delegates, I stand before you today to discuss a matter that has troubled many of us. The question of humanity. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Some species leaned forward with interest. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I know what you have heard, Cale Thorne continued. The stories spread quickly through our networks. Tales of humans who refuse to surrender even when death is certain. Reports of their strange laughter in dangerous situations. Accounts of their willingness to die for complete strangers. I know these stories because I dismissed them myself not long ago. The Viridian diplomat touched a control panel, and holographic images appeared around him. They showed Earth, the blue and green planet that humanity called home. 3 years ago, my government sent me to live among the humans, not to spy, but to understand. We needed to know if the stories were true. We needed to know if humanity was truly different from every other species we had encountered. Ambassador Morgan allowed herself a small smile. She remembered meeting Cale Thorne when he first arrived on Earth. He had been so formal, so careful with every word and gesture. By the time he left, he had learned to appreciate human coffee, and had even attended a baseball game. What I found on Earth changed everything I thought I knew about intelligent life, Cale Thorne said. His voice carried genuine emotion now. Something rare for a Viridian. I walked through their cities, massive structures of steel and glass where millions live together. I sailed on their oceans, vast bodies of water that cover most of their planet. I even ventured into their wilderness areas, places they deliberately leave untouched despite their need for space and resources. The holographic images changed, showing scenes from Earth, crowded streets, peaceful forests, children playing in parks. But these physical observations told me little. Every species has cities and wilderness. What I needed to understand was something deeper. I needed to understand the human mind, the human heart. Wine, a delegate from the Craxian Empire, a species that looked like giant insects, clicked its mandibles together. Get to the point. Viridian. Why should we fear them? Cale Thorne turned to face the Craxian directly. That is exactly the wrong question, honored delegate. The question is not why we should fear them. The question is why we fear them at all. Confused murmurs filled the chamber. Commander Bennett leaned over to whisper to Ambassador Morgan. He really knows how to work a crowd. Cale Thorne raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent again. Humans joined our Federation only 15 years ago. In galactic terms, this is barely a moment. Yet in that short time, they have become the subject of more debate, more concern, and more fear than species that have been with us for centuries. Why? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. It is not because they are powerful. The Draknir have larger fleets. It is not because they are numerous. The Hytharian colonies outnumber human settlements by a factor of 10. It is not because they are technologically advanced. At least 20 species here possess superior technology. The holographic display changed again, this time showing a graph. It mapped various species against different measurements of military strength, population, and technological advancement. Humanity sat firmly in the middle range for all categories. On paper, humans are unremarkable. They are a young species with limited resources and developing technology. They should not concern us at all. Yet here we are, dedicating an entire assembly session to discussing them. A delegate from the Thylorian Confederacy, a species that resembled upright walking reptiles, spoke up. We have all heard the reports. Human soldiers who do not retreat. Human colonists who survive impossible conditions. Human explorers who venture into dangers that would make any sane being turn back. These are not the actions of a reasonable species. Exactly, Kael'thorne said, pointing at the Thylorian. These are not the actions we expect, and that is what frightens us. Humans do not follow the patterns we understand. They do not make the logical choices we would make. Ambassador Morgan stood up. The chamber turned to look at her. If I may address the council? Kael'thorne nodded, and Morgan stepped forward to join him on the central platform. Delegate Kael'thorne is correct, she said. Humans do not always make the logical choice. We do not always take the safe path, but there are reasons for this. Reasons that go back to our history and our evolution. We are not trying to be difficult. We are not trying to be frightening. We are simply being ourselves. A small alien that looked like a floating jellyfish pulsed with bioluminescent light, its way of speaking. The translation came through immediately. Then help us understand. What makes you this way? Morgan looked at Kael'thorne, who nodded encouragingly. That is exactly what this assembly is for, the Viridian said. I have studied humanity for 3 years. I have learned their history, understood their motivations, and witnessed their actions firsthand. What I am about to share with you will answer many questions, but I warn you, it may also raise new concerns. The chamber fell completely silent. Every being present leaned forward, waiting. However, Kael'thorne said, I believe that understanding humans is not just important, it is essential. Because humanity is not going away. They are here. They are part of our Federation. Kael'thorne touched the control panel again, and new images filled the space around him. They showed various species from across the galaxy, all with one thing in common. Forward-facing eyes, sharp teeth, strong muscles. Predators. Let me address the most common concern first, the Viridian diplomat said. Yes, humans are predators. This fact makes many species uncomfortable, especially those whose ancestors were prey animals. But predation alone does not explain human behavior. He gestured to the images. The Kralix are predators. The Zenthari hunt in packs on their homeworld. The Norvathians have venom that can drop a creature twice their size. We have dozens of predator species in the Federation, and most of them cause no concern whatsoever. So, why are humans different? A delegate from the Polarian species, beings that looked like tall, thin birds, spoke up. Because humans are efficient killers. Their history is filled with warfare. They have developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet multiple times over. True, Kael'thorne acknowledged. But the Draknir also developed planet-killing weapons. The Mithran Empire once possessed biological weapons that could wipe out entire species, yet we do not gather in emergency sessions to discuss them. There must be something else about humans that troubles us. Commander Bennett watched carefully. He knew where Kael'thorne was going with this, and he was not sure how the other species would react. The Viridian diplomat's expression softened. Let me tell you about my first week on Earth. I was staying in a city called Portland, in a region they call Oregon, I was walking through a neighborhood when I heard a child crying. The holographic display changed, showing a recording from Cale Thorne's own memory. A small human girl, perhaps 8 years old, knelt on the ground. In her hands, she held a small bird with a broken wing. "This is Sophie," Cale Thorne said. I watched as she begged her father to help the creature. The bird was nothing to them. It was not a pet, not livestock, not anything of value. It was just a wild animal that had injured itself. The recording continued, showing Sophie's father, a man named Paul Henderson, carefully picking up the bird. They got into their vehicle and drove across the city. They took the bird to an animal hospital, Cale Thorne explained. They paid money, significant money by their standards, to have veterinarians examine and treat this creature. The doctors worked for 3 hours to set the wing properly. Sophie visited the hospital every day for 2 weeks, until the bird recovered enough to be released. The chamber was quiet. Many delegates looked confused. I asked Paul Henderson why they did this, Cale Thorne continued. He looked at me as if the question itself was strange. He said that the bird was suffering, and they could help, so they did. It was that simple to him. A Craxian delegate clicked its mandibles skeptically. This proves nothing. Many species show compassion to injured creatures. It is instinct. Nothing more. You are partially correct, Cale Thorne said. But let me show you more examples. During my time on Earth, I documented over 500 instances of humans helping other creatures. They rescue animals from floods, fires, and dangerous situations. They create sanctuaries for endangered species. They spend billions of their currency units protecting creatures that provide them no benefit whatsoever. New images appeared, showing humans pulling dogs from frozen lakes, firefighters carrying cats from burning buildings, volunteers cleaning oil from the feathers of seabirds. But here is what makes it remarkable, Cale Thorne said, his voice growing intense. Humans do not limit this compassion to creatures from their own planet. Since joining the Federation, humans have established rescue organizations for alien species. They have volunteers who work to save Thylorian reef creatures. They have funded conservation efforts for the methane-breathing fauna of Craxus Minor. They extend this irrational compassion across species boundaries. Ambassador Morgan smiled slightly. She knew what was coming next. Now, Cale Thorne said, and his tone changed, becoming darker. Let me show you the other side of human nature. The holographic display shifted to show a military briefing room. The date stamp indicated it was from 7 years ago, during the Battle of Arcturus 7. This is Captain Ryan Clark of the human destroyer Valiant. His ship was part of a joint Federation force defending a Thylorian colony world from raiders. When the battle turned against us, the order came to evacuate the remaining civilians and retreat. The recording showed Captain Clark, a young man with determined eyes, sitting in his command chair. Around him, alarms blared, and damage reports scrolled across screens. Captain Clark had a choice, Cale Thorne said. He could follow orders, evacuate with his ship, and live to fight another day. Or he could stay behind to cover the evacuation transports, knowing that his ship could not survive long enough for his own escape. The delegates watched as the recording played. They heard Captain Clark give orders to his crew. All personnel. This is the captain. I am staying to cover the transports. Anyone who wants to evacuate has 60 seconds to get to the escape pods. No judgment, no shame. This is a volunteer mission only. In the recording, not a single crew member moved to leave. Clark and his crew of 47 held that corridor of space for 18 minutes, Cale Thorne said quietly. They faced 3 enemy cruisers with a damaged destroyer. They should have died in the first 90 seconds. But they used every trick, every tactic, every ounce of skill they possessed. They bought enough time for 6 evacuation transports carrying 2,000 Thylorian civilians to escape. The recording showed the final moments. The Valiant's hull was breached in multiple places. Life support was failing. Captain Clark's last transmission came through. His voice calm despite the chaos around him. To all valiant crew members who might hear this recording later, you are the finest people I have ever known. To the Thylorian families we protected today, take care of each other. Remember us if you can, but live your lives fully if you cannot. To whoever finds our wreckage, know that we did our duty and we have no regrets. Clark out. Silence filled the chamber. Even species that did not understand human emotion could feel the weight of those words. Not one person on that ship tried to save themselves, Thorne said. Not one person abandoned their captain or their mission. They died together, protecting aliens they had never met, for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. The Thylorian delegate stood up, her reptilian features showing clear emotion. The Thylorian Confederacy will never forget the valiant. We teach our children about Captain Clark and his crew. They are honored in our culture as heroes. And this is my point, Thorne said, turning to face the entire assembly. Human compassion is not weakness. It is not simple instinct. It is a choice they make. Over and over again. They choose to care about creatures that mean nothing to them. They choose to protect strangers at the cost of their own lives. He paused, making sure every delegate understood his next words. This compassion makes them unpredictable. If you hurt someone a human cares about, they will come for you. It does not matter if you are stronger, if you are more numerous, if you are more advanced. They will find a way. They will persist until they succeed or until they die trying. And as we just saw, dying does not frighten them as much as it should. A small delegate from the Polarian species spoke up nervously. Are you saying humans are dangerous because they care too much? I am saying that humans have weaponized compassion, Thorne replied. They have turned empathy into a force that drives them to impossible acts. And that force can be directed at saving lives or at destroying threats. The same instinct that made Sophie cry over an injured bird is the same instinct that made Captain Clark sacrifice himself for alien civilians. Commander Bennett found himself nodding. Thorne understood. He really understood. In Viridian culture, Thorne continued, we calculate the value of our actions. We measure costs against benefits. We make rational decisions. Most species in the Federation operate this way. But humans add something else to the equation, something we struggle to quantify. They add meaning. New images appeared, showing humans in various situations. Doctors treating patients in remote areas. Teachers working with difficult students. Volunteers building homes for strangers. Humans do not just ask if something is possible or profitable, Thorne explained. They ask if it is meaningful. They ask if it matters. And once they decide something matters, rational calculations no longer apply. They will spend fortunes, sacrifice comfort, and risk their lives for things that have meaning to them. What you are describing sounds like insanity, a delegate observed. Perhaps, Thorne agreed. Or perhaps it is the highest form of intelligence. Thorne waited for the chamber to quiet down before continuing. He could see that his words were having an effect, but he had not yet revealed the most important aspect of human nature. Honored delegates, he said, I now want to discuss what I call the persistence factor. This, more than anything else, is what makes humanity unique in the galaxy. The holographic displays changed again, showing a barren planet with a thin atmosphere and rocky terrain. The designation read Kepler 442b. This is a human colony world, Thorne explained. It was settled 23 years ago by 5,000 volunteers seeking a new life. The colony was established with standard Federation support, including regular supply ships and communication relays. He touched the control panel, and the image zoomed in to show a small settlement of buildings clustered around a landing pad. 12 years ago, there was a catastrophic failure in the navigation beacon network for this sector. Multiple redundancies failed simultaneously, a 1 in 10 million chance occurrence. This colony lost all contact with Earth and the Federation. The delegates leaned forward, Many of them knew how colonists typically responded to such situations. When our ships restored the beacon network 9 years later, and rescue vessels finally reached Kepler 442b, they expected to find either graves or a desperate population barely clinging to survival. Commander Bennett smiled. He had read the reports from that rescue mission. Instead, Cale Thorne said, and his voice filled with something like wonder, they found a thriving community of 6,000 people. Not 5,000. 6,000. Families had continued having children. The colony had not just survived, it had grown. Reinkler, new images appeared, showing expanded settlements, cultivated fields, and even what looked like a small manufacturing facility. The colonists had built 3 new towns. They had established agriculture using native plants, modified with earth crops. They had created a democratic government with elected officials and written laws. They had schools, hospitals, and even entertainment facilities. One colonist had opened a restaurant. A Polarian delegate spoke up, confusion clear in its voice. But how? Without supplies, without support, how did they survive? They worked. Cale Thorne said simply. When the supply ships stopped coming, they did not panic. They did not despair. They looked at their situation, assessed their resources, and made a plan. Then, they followed that plan for 9 years. The holographic display showed a human man with weathered features and graying hair. The name beneath read Mayor Greg Sullivan. This is the colony leader. Elected by the population 2 years after contact, was lost. When the rescue ships arrived, the captain asked Sullivan how they had managed. Sullivan told them they had never given up hope. They assumed help was coming, and prepared accordingly. Cale Thorne pulled up a recording of that conversation. The rescue ship captain, a Viridian named Teln Thor, could be heard asking, "But what if help never came? What was your backup plan?" Mayor Sullivan's response made several delegates gasp. "We would have built our own starships eventually. We had already started designing an orbital launch system using local resources. Figured we had another 10 years of work before we could build something capable of reaching the nearest inhabited system. But we would have done it." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Building starships from scratch on a colony world with limited technology was considered impossible by most species. The rescue team investigated these claims, Cale Thorne said. They found detailed engineering plans, resource surveys, and a partially constructed test facility. The human colonists were not exaggerating. They had actually begun work on this impossible project. He brought up another image, this one showing a different colony world with harsh environmental conditions. Let me contrast this with the Meridian colony of Tau Ceti Prime. The Meridians are an accomplished species with technology more advanced than humanity's. Their colony lost contact with their homeworld for only 6 months due to a solar storm interfering with communications. The image showed the Meridian colony, and the difference was stark. Buildings in disrepair, signs of civil unrest, abandoned sections. When communications were restored, 40% of the colony population had died, not from lack of resources, but from despair and conflict. Without contact with their homeworld, without guidance from their central government, the Meridians fell into chaos. They gave up. Cale Thorne turned to face the assembly directly. The difference between these outcomes is not technology or intelligence or resources. It is something psychological, something that seems to be unique to humans. They simply refuse to accept defeat. Ambassador Morgan stood and cleared her throat. If I may add some context to Delegate Cale Thorne's observation. Cale Thorne nodded, and Morgan stepped forward. Humans evolved on a world that tried very hard to kill us, she said. We survived ice ages that covered most of our planet in glaciers. We endured plagues that killed millions. We faced predators larger and stronger than us. We dealt with droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes. Earth is not a gentle world, and it did not make us a gentle species. She gestured, and new images appeared showing various periods of Earth's history. Humans in primitive clothing, hunting massive beasts. Humans building shelters in frozen wastelands. Humans crossing vast oceans on wooden ships. Our ancestors were pursuit predators, Morgan continued. We did not have sharp claws or powerful jaws. We could not outrun most prey animals in a sprint, but we could chase them, for hours, for days if necessary. We would follow wounded prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Other predators would give up after a failed attack, but humans never stopped. Commander Bennett watched the reactions of the various delegates. Some looked disturbed, others fascinated. This persistence became part of our nature, Morgan said. It is in our folklore, our stories, our cultural identity. We admire heroes who never give up. We celebrate individuals who overcome impossible odds through sheer determination. Giving up is seen as shameful in most human cultures. Cale Thorne brought up new data, showing graphs and statistics. I have studied human history extensively. In every major crisis, every disaster, every seemingly impossible situation, there is a pattern. Humans adapt. The graphs showed various historical events, wars, famines, technological failures, all followed by recovery curves. When their civilizations collapse, they rebuild. When diseases devastate their populations, they develop medicine. When they face extinction, they find a way to survive. This has happened over and over throughout their history. A Craxian delegate clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. But surely there must be limits? Surely even humans can be defeated permanently? That is the question that keeps many of us awake at night, Cale Thorne replied. Because honestly, we do not know. Human history suggests that they will adapt to any challenge given enough time. They learn from defeats and come back stronger. He brought up footage from the Raxian conflict, a war that had occurred 8 years ago. During this conflict, the Raxian Empire deployed a new weapon type that disrupted human shield technology. In the first 3 battles, human forces suffered severe casualties. By the 4th battle, they had adapted their tactics and negated the weapon's effectiveness. By the 6th battle, they had developed countermeasures. By the end of the conflict, the Raxian wonder weapon was useless. The footage showed human engineers working frantically, testing different approaches, failing, and trying again. This is what concerns other species, Cale Thorne said. Humans do not just persist. They learn. They take every failure as a lesson and every defeat as a challenge. Making an enemy of humanity means committing to an eternal conflict, because they will never stop adapting, never stop trying, never stop coming back. He paused, letting that sink in. I spoke with a human military historian named Colonel Steve Martinez. He told me something that I found both inspiring and terrifying. He said that in human military doctrine, there is no such thing as a permanent defeat. Every loss is classified as a temporary setback. Every retreat is seen as an opportunity to regroup and try a different approach. The colonel's image appeared, a stern-looking man with close-cropped hair and numerous medals on his uniform. Colonel Martinez told me that the worst thing an enemy can do is wound humanity without finishing them off. Because they will study what you did, learn from it, and develop counters. Then, they will return, stronger and better prepared. A small delegate from a peaceful species spoke up nervously. This sounds like a species that cannot coexist peacefully with others. They will always be preparing for the next conflict. Actually, the opposite is true, Cale Thorne said. Humans prefer peace. Cale Thorne sensed that the assembly was growing weary. But he had one more critical point to make. This one would be the most difficult for many species to understand. I must now address what I call the human paradox, he said. It is the most confusing and perhaps most dangerous aspect of their nature. The holographic displays showed 2 contrasting images. On one side, a human courtroom where defendants were given fair trials. On the other, a battlefield where human soldiers fought with devastating efficiency. Humans are simultaneously the most peaceful and most violent species in the Galactic Federation, Cale Thorne declared. This contradiction exists at the very core of their civilization. Several delegates made sounds of confusion. Commander Bennett knew this would be hard to explain to species that saw things in more absolute terms. Let me provide examples, Cale Thorne continued. Humans have more laws restricting warfare than any other species. They invented the concept of war crimes, rules for how they are allowed to kill each other. They hold trials for soldiers who violate these rules, even soldiers from their own forces. The display showed documents, treaties, and legal proceedings. The Geneva Conventions, the International Criminal Court, numerous military tribunals. They have outlawed certain weapons as too cruel, even though these weapons would give them tactical advantages. They have rules about who can be targeted, how prisoners must be treated, and what constitutes acceptable collateral damage. They limit themselves deliberately. A Draknir delegate, a species known for their military might, spoke up. This seems like weakness. Why would they restrict their own effectiveness in combat? Because, Cale Thorne said, humans believe that how they fight is as important as whether they win. They have moral and ethical frameworks that they refuse to abandon, even when those frameworks make victory more difficult. He brought up new footage, this time from the Raxian conflict that had been mentioned earlier. During this war, human intelligence discovered that the Raxian Empire was using captured civilians as forced labor in weapons manufacturing facilities. Thousands of beings from various species were being worked to death to support the Raxian war effort. The footage showed these facilities, grim places where exhausted beings toiled under harsh conditions. The human response to this discovery was methodical and, frankly, terrifying to witness. New recordings appeared, showing a human commander in a pristine military uniform. Her name tag read, Commander Nicole Harper. Commander Harper issued an ultimatum to the Raxian leadership. They had 48 hours to release all prisoners and allow Federation observers to verify their treatment. If they refused, there would be consequences. Cale Thorne played the recording of that ultimatum. Commander Harper's voice was calm, professional, and absolutely cold. The Raxians refused. Cale Thorne continued. They believed humans were bluffing. They believed that no force would sacrifice strategic advantages to save prisoners that were not even human. The holographic display showed what happened next. Fleet movements, tactical displays, battle footage. 72 hours after the ultimatum expired, every military installation in the Raxian system was disabled. Not destroyed. Disabled. Human forces used precision strikes to knock out shield generators, power plants, and weapon systems. They left the Raxian military completely intact, but utterly unable to fight back. The footage showed Raxian ships floating dead in space, their crews unharmed but their vessels powerless. Ground installations, similarly intact but offline. Then human forces went facility by facility, liberating every prisoner, Cale Thorne said. They sent in special operations teams who subdued guards with non-lethal force when possible. They provided medical care to injured prisoners. They documented every abuse they found for later prosecution. Ambassador Morgan watched the assembly's reactions carefully. She remembered, when these events had unfolded, the debates within Earth's government about how to respond. The entire operation took 6 days, Cale Thorne said. Human casualties were minimal because they had achieved total tactical superiority before beginning the liberation effort. Raxian military casualties were also minimal, less than 200 deaths in a campaign that involved dozens of installations and thousands of soldiers. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. This is what I mean by the paradox. Humans could have destroyed the entire Raxian system from orbit. They had the firepower and the justification. Instead, they executed a campaign of surgical precision that achieved their objective while minimizing deaths on both sides. A Thylorian delegate spoke up. This demonstrates restraint and moral character. Why would this be frightening? Cale Thorne's expression became grave. Because it demonstrates total mastery. The message humans sent was clear. We can hurt you whenever we want. However we want. Wherever you are. We choose not to, because we are better than that. But never doubt that we can. The implications rippled through the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. There is more, Kalethorn said. After the campaign ended, human forces arrested 47 Raxian commanders who had been directly responsible for the forced labor program. These individuals were taken to Earth and tried in human courts for crimes against sentient life. New footage showed a courtroom where Raxian officers stood trial. Human lawyers argued both prosecution and defense. Judges listened to evidence carefully. 39 of them were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 15 to 50 years. 8 were acquitted due to lack of evidence. All of them are currently serving their sentences in human detention facilities. Kalethorn brought up images of these facilities. They were secure but humane, with individual cells, recreation areas, and educational programs. Humans abolished capital punishment centuries ago. He explained. They consider execution to be barbaric, even for those guilty of terrible crimes. So, these Raxian commanders will live out their sentences in relative comfort, being fed and housed at human expense. The Draknir delegate who had spoken earlier clicked its claws in confusion. I do not understand. They demonstrate overwhelming force, but then show mercy to their enemies? This is contradictory. Exactly, Kalethorn said. Humans contain contradictions that most species find impossible to reconcile. They are capable of terrible violence, but prefer peaceful solutions. They will show mercy to defeated enemies, but will hunt down those who commit atrocities. They value all life, but will kill without hesitation to protect innocence. Commander Bennett decided to speak. He stood and addressed the assembly. If I may explain from a human perspective, he said, we have a saying. Violence is the last resort, but when it becomes necessary, it must be swift and decisive. We do not enjoy war. We do not seek conflict. But when we fight to win as quickly as possible, to minimize overall suffering. He gestured to the images of the Raxian campaign. Every day that conflict continues, more people die. So we train to be overwhelmingly effective in combat. We develop devastating weapons and tactics. But we also constrain ourselves with rules and ethics because we remember our own history. We know what happens when violence becomes normalized, when atrocities become acceptable, when the ends justify any means. Ambassador Morgan stood beside him. Humans have committed terrible acts in our past. We have committed genocide, practiced slavery, and waged wars of conquest. These are shameful parts of our history that we teach to every generation. We study our mistakes so we do not repeat them. Kalethorn nodded appreciatively. This is another unique human trait. They feel guilt for actions committed by their ancestors centuries ago. They create monuments to their victims, teach their children about historical injustices, and work to ensure such things never happen again. He brought up images from Earth, Holocaust memorials, slavery museums, monuments to various historical tragedies. No other species does this, Kalethorn said. Most civilizations glorify their past conquests and minimize their historical crimes. But humans confront their dark history directly and use it to shape their present behavior. A small alien from a peaceful species spoke timidly. So humans are dangerous because they know they are dangerous? They have seen their own capacity for evil, and it frightens them? Yes, Kalethorn said simply. Humans understand what they are capable of, and it terrifies them. That is why they create so many rules, build so many institutions, and establish so many safeguards. They are trying to protect the galaxy from themselves as much as from external threats. The chamber fell silent. This revelation changed how many delegates viewed humanity. This is the paradox, Calethorn continued. You cannot intimidate humans because they do not fear death. You cannot appeal to their cruelty because they are not cruel by choice. But you also cannot exploit their kindness because they will recognize manipulation and respond with overwhelming force. He brought up a final image, showing human children being taught in a classroom. Human children are educated about ethics from a young age. They learn about fairness, justice, and moral responsibility. They study philosophy and debate difficult questions. They are taught. TKL Thorne stood at the center of the Grand Council chamber, sensing that the moment had come for his final and most important message. The delegates had listened to his analysis, seen the evidence, and struggled to understand the contradictions that defined humanity. Now, they needed to know what it all meant for the future. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying a weight that made every being in the chamber focus completely on his words. I have shown you what humans are. Now I must tell you what they are becoming. The holographic displays dimmed, leaving just Cale Thorne illuminated in the center of the vast space. Some of you fear humanity. You see them as a threat to galactic stability, a dangerous variable in our carefully balanced federation. I want to tell you that your fear is justified, but not for the reasons you think. A ripple of alarm moved through the assembly. Several delegates began to speak, but Cale Thorne raised his hand. Please, let me explain. Humans are not dangerous because they are warlike. They are not threatening because they are powerful. They are concerning because they are still evolving, still changing, still defining who they will become. He gestured, and images of human history appeared. Ancient civilizations, medieval kingdoms, industrial revolutions, space exploration. Humans have existed as a technological species for only a few thousand years. Most of us in this chamber represent civilizations tens or hundreds of thousands of years old. We have become what we are going to be. We have reached stable cultural and social equilibrium. But humans are still in flux. Ambassador Morgan watched carefully. This was the part of Cale Thorne's speech that could either bridge the gap between species or widen it further. In another 1,000 years, Cale Thorne continued, humans could become the greatest force for peace and cooperation the galaxy has ever seen. Or they could become the most terrifying conquerors in known space. The path they take is not yet determined, and that uncertainty is what should concern us. He paused, then added with emphasis, but here is the critical point. The path they take depends largely on how we treat them now. A Craxian delegate clicked its mandibles aggressively. Are you suggesting we should appease them out of fear? No. Cale Thorne replied firmly. I am suggesting we should engage with them honestly, treat them fairly, and help guide their development toward their better nature. Because the alternative is to create the very monster we fear. The holographic display showed a complex diagram illustrating different possible futures. If we treat humanity with suspicion and hostility, if we contain them and limit their growth, we will push them into a defensive posture. They will see the galaxy as hostile, and they will respond accordingly. Remember their persistence, their refusal to surrender. A cornered humanity will not submit. They will fight, adapt, and eventually break free. And they will remember how they were treated. Commander Bennett found himself nodding. He had voiced similar concerns to the Earth leadership many times. However, Cale Thorne continued, and his tone shifted to something more hopeful. If we embrace them, integrate them, and work with them, we can help channel their extraordinary traits toward positive ends. Their persistence becomes determination to solve galactic problems. Their capacity for violence becomes strength to protect the innocent. Their compassion becomes a force for unity. He touched the control panel, and a new image appeared. It showed a human man with kind eyes and graying hair, standing in a university lecture hall. During my time on Earth, I befriended a history professor named Daniel Pierce. He taught at a university in a city called Boston. Professor Pierce became my guide to understanding human culture and history. The image changed to show various historical scenes as Cale Thorne spoke. Daniel taught me about human conflicts, the world wars that killed millions, the nuclear standoffs that nearly destroyed their entire planet, the genocides, the ethnic cleansings, the countless atrocities humans have committed against each other. It was a dark education, and it reinforced many of my fears. The chamber was silent, every delegate listening intently. But Daniel also taught me about reconciliation. He showed me how Germany and France, bitter enemies who fought 3 major wars, became close allies. He explained South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where a nation confronted its racist past and chose forgiveness over vengeance. He described how Japan and the United States, after a brutal war, became trusted partners. The images showed these reconciliations, former enemies working together, building together, creating together. Humans have repeatedly chosen to forgive instead of seeking revenge. They have rebuilt their enemies, helped their former opponents prosper, and turned battlefields into places of peace. This pattern appears throughout their history. Cale Thorne's voice grew passionate, more emotional than most had ever heard a Viridian sound. In my final conversation with Daniel, he told me something I will never forget. He said that humans carry a genetic memory of their worst moments. They remember, on some deep level, what they are capable of. The Holocaust, the atomic bombs, the genocides. These events haunt them, even generations later. The display showed memorials and museums, places where humans preserve the memory of their darkest hours. Daniel said that humans are trying to become better than they were. That is why they reach for the stars, why they create laws, why they build institutions. They are running from their own capacity for evil, trying to evolve beyond their violent past. Ambassador Morgan felt tears forming in her eyes. Professor Pierce had been her mentor in college, years before she entered diplomatic service. His words, spoken through Cale Thorne, resonated deeply. This is why the galaxy's response to humanity matters so much, Cale Thorne said. We have the opportunity to help a species transcend their darker nature. Or we can confirm their fears that the universe is hostile, and that strength is the only protection. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. I have a proposal. Ambassador Morgan has drafted what she calls the Human Integration Initiative. It is a comprehensive program that would embed human advisors, scientists, peacekeepers, and cultural liaisons throughout Federation space. The holographic display showed the detailed plan, pages of proposals and frameworks. Some of you see this as infiltration, as humans trying to gain influence and power. I understand that concern, but I have read the entire proposal, and I believe it is genuine. Humans want to prove themselves. They want to contribute. They want to be part of something greater than their single species. A Thylorian delegate stood. The Thylorian Confederacy supports this initiative. Humans have already proven their worth to us. We welcome their integration into our communities. Other voices rose, some in support, others in opposition. Cale Thorne raised his voice to be heard. The Viridian Empire will support this initiative. I have spent 3 years studying humanity, and I have made my decision. The risk of helping them is far less than the risk of alienating them. He gestured to Ambassador Morgan, inviting her to speak. Morgan stood and walked to the center platform. She took a moment to compose herself before addressing the assembly. Thank you, Delegate Cale Thorne, for your honest assessment of my species. You have shown both our strengths and our flaws with accuracy and fairness. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. Humans do want to be part of this federation. We want to explore, learn, and contribute. We bring our skills, our determination, and yes, our willingness to fight when necessary. But we also bring our capacity for compassion, our drive to protect the innocent, and our hope for a better future. Her voice strengthened, carrying the conviction of her words. However, I must be honest with you, as Kale Thorne has been honest about us. Humans will defend themselves. We will protect our allies. We will not allow ourselves to be bullied or contained or treated as second-class members of this Federation. Commander Bennett stood beside her, his military bearing reinforcing her words. We have a choice before us. Morgan continued. We can build a galaxy where humans are trusted partners, contributing our strengths and learning from your wisdom. Or we can create a galaxy. The Grand Council chamber had been in debate for 3 hours. Voices rose and fell, in waves of argument and discussion. Some delegates supported the Human Integration Initiative, seeing it as an opportunity for growth and cooperation. Others opposed it, viewing humans as too unpredictable and potentially dangerous to integrate so fully into Federation society. Kale Thorne remained at the central platform, observing the chaos he had helped create. Ambassador Morgan and Commander Bennett had returned to their seats, knowing that the human delegation could not be seen as pressuring the decision. This choice had to come from the Federation itself. Finally, the Council Arbiter, an ancient being from the eldest species called Zarthun, activated the silence field. The chamber immediately fell quiet. All sound dampened, except for the Arbiter's voice. We have heard Delegate Kale Thorne's report, Zarthun said, their voice like wind through crystals. We have listened to Ambassador Morgan's response. Now we must decide. But before we vote, I wish to speak. The Arbiter rarely spoke during assemblies, preferring to moderate rather than participate. When they did speak, every being listened. I am 12,000 years old, Zarthun said. I have witnessed the rise and fall of 17 civilizations. I have seen species join our Federation and thrive. I have seen others reject us and disappear into history. I have observed patterns that younger species cannot yet perceive. 1. Under those, the holographic displays activated, showing historical data that spanned millennia. Humanity reminds me of the Korath, Zarthun continued. A species that joined us 4,000 years ago. They too were warriors, persistent and seemingly unstoppable. Many feared them, as we fear humans now. Images appeared showing the Korath, a species that looked like bipedal wolves with advanced technology. The Federation chose to embrace the Korath. We integrated them, learned from them, and helped channel their warrior culture toward protective, rather than aggressive purposes. Today, Korath peacekeepers serve on every major station. Korath diplomats help negotiate truces. Korath engineers design our defensive systems. The display showed modern Korath in various peaceful roles, their fierce nature now serving the common good. But I also remember the Vexnar, Zarthun said, and their tone became somber. Another warrior species, equally persistent and capable. The Federation feared them and chose containment over integration. We limited their expansion, restricted their access to technology, and treated them as a threat. New images appeared, showing a species that looked like armored reptiles. The historical records showed a gradual escalation of tension and hostility. The Vexnar responded exactly as we feared they would. They became hostile, aggressive, and eventually broke away from the Federation. The war that followed cost millions of lives and devastated 3-star systems before we finally established a peace treaty. To this day, the Vexnar remain outside the Federation, independent and distrustful of us. The comparison hung in the air. 2 similar species, 2 different approaches, 2 vastly different outcomes. I do not claim that humans are identical to either the Korath or the Vexnar, Zarthun said. Every species is unique. But the pattern is clear. How we treat humanity now will shape who they become. The choice before us is not simply about policy or security. It is about the future we wish to create. The Arbiter's ancient eyes, which had seen millennia pass, focused on the human delegation. I have studied the Human Integration Initiative. It is comprehensive, well-designed, and includes appropriate safeguards. More importantly, it is offered in good faith by a species seeking partnership, not dominance. I recommend we accept it." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. The arbiter rarely made direct recommendations. However, Zarthun continued, "This decision must be made by consensus, not by my authority alone. Let those who wish to speak do so now, before we vote." The silence field lifted, and immediately, a Draknir general stood. "I oppose this initiative," the general said firmly. "Humans are too dangerous. We should maintain current restrictions until we better understand them." Foreman C. End quote. IB.R. M.R. A Polarian diplomat rose to counter. "We have had 15 years to understand them. How much longer do we wait?" Meanwhile, they grow frustrated and isolated. This creates the very danger we seek to avoid. Back and forth the arguments went. Species shared their concerns about human military capability, their unpredictability, their rapid technological advancement. Others spoke of human compassion, their contributions to Federation science, their willingness to help other species. Commander Bennett watched it all with a soldier's patience. He had been in enough high-stakes situations to recognize that this decision could go either way. Ambassador Morgan, however, felt the weight of the moment more personally. She thought of Professor Pierce, of his belief that humans could transcend their violent past. She thought of Captain Ryan Clark, who gave his life for aliens he barely knew. She thought of the colonists on Kepler 442b, who refused to give up hope even when abandoned. These were her people, flawed and contradictory, capable of terrible violence and profound kindness. They deserved a chance to prove themselves. A small voice interrupted the debate. It came from a delegate of the Whisper species. Being so peaceful, they rarely spoke in assemblies. "I have a question for the human delegation," the Whisper said, their voice barely audible even with amplification. Ambassador Morgan stood. "Of course. Please ask. If we reject this initiative, if we choose to continue treating humans with suspicion and limitation, what will you do?" The chamber fell completely silent. This was the question everyone wanted answered, but feared to ask. Morgan took a deep breath. "We will respect the Federation's decision. We will remain members in accordance with our treaty obligations. We will continue to contribute what we can within the current restrictions." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I would be lying if I said we would not be disappointed. We would be hurt. Frankly, we have tried to prove ourselves worthy of your trust. We have followed your laws, supported your missions, and died protecting your civilians. If that is not enough, we do not know what more we can do." Commander Bennett stood beside her. "However, we will not stop being who we are. We will continue to explore, to grow, to push boundaries. That is human nature, and we cannot change it even if we wanted to. Whether we do that as integrated members of the Federation or as isolated outsiders is your choice, not ours." The honesty of their response seemed to affect many delegates. These were not threats or ultimatums, just statements of fact. Kalethorn spoke up. "If I may add one final observation, I have come to know these humans well. If we reject them, they will not attack us or seek revenge, but they will drift away. Gradually and inevitably. They will focus on building their own civilization, their own networks, their own alliances. In a few generations, we will face not an integrated partner, but a separate power block, one that developed without our guidance or influence." He looked at Ambassador Morgan with genuine respect, and given humanity's persistence and adaptability, that power block will eventually rival the Federation itself. At that point, we will have created either a valuable ally who remembers we abandoned them, or a powerful competitor we could have befriended. Either outcome is worse than taking the risk now to integrate them properly. Zarthun raised one crystalline appendage. Wise words from a young diplomat. Now, let us vote. The motion before us is to accept the Human Integration Initiative as proposed, with the standard oversight and review mechanisms. All in favor, signal now. The holographic display lit up with responses. Slowly, indicators appeared showing which species voted yes, no, or abstained. Ambassador Morgan held her breath. Commander Bennett's hand moved unconsciously toward his service weapon, a habit from years of military service. Though no weapon would help here. The votes accumulated. Green indicators for yes, red for no, yellow for abstention. The Thylorians voted yes, no surprise there. The Viridians voted yes, as Kale Thorne had promised. The Korath delegation, remembering their own history, voted yes overwhelmingly, but the Draknir voted no, as did several military-focused species who saw humans as potential rivals. The Craxians, after intense internal debate visible even on the council floor, voted yes by a narrow margin. The Polarians split their vote, half yes, half abstaining. Species after species registered their decisions. The chamber watched as the totals climbed. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the results finalized. The motion passes, Zarthun announced. With 68% voting in favor, 22% opposed, and 10% abstaining, the Human Integration Initiative is approved. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered, others protested. Many simply sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Ambassador Morgan felt tears streaming down her face. Commander Bennett allowed himself a rare smile. Kale Thorne walked over to them, extending his hand in the human gesture of friendship he had learned during his time on Earth. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "Now comes the hard part. Living up to the trust we have placed in you." Morgan shook his hand firmly. "We will not let you down. I promise you that." "I know," Kale Thorne replied. "That is why I fought so hard for this." Zarthun spoke again, calling for order. "The Human Integration Initiative will begin implementation in 6 standard months. Ambassador Morgan, you will coordinate with Federation representatives to establish the protocols and assignments. This assembly is adjourned." As the delegates began to file out, many approached the human delegation. Some offered congratulations, others warnings. A few simply wanted to meet the species that had caused such controversy. Through it all, Ambassador Morgan kept thinking of a phrase Professor Pierce had taught her years ago. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Humanity had been given a chance. Not everyone trusted them, and the road ahead would be difficult. But they had been given a chance, and that was all they needed. As Commander Bennett often said, humans were good at making the most of opportunities. Later that evening, as the human delegation prepared to return to Earth with the news, Kale Thorne stood alone in the observation deck of the Grand Council station. He looked out at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. He had taken a risk, speaking so openly about humanity's potential dangers and benefits. His career could have ended if the vote had gone differently. But he believed in what he had said. Every word. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they were also capable of greatness. They contained contradictions that defied logic but somehow worked in practice. They were the most peaceful warriors and the most warlike peacekeepers the galaxy had ever seen. And now, they would be integrated into Federation society, bringing all their contradictions with them. Kale Thorne smiled, something Viridians rarely did. The galaxy was about to become much more interesting. Behind him, the door opened. Ambassador Morgan entered, carrying 2 cups of that bitter beverage humans called coffee. "Thought you might want this," she said, offering him one. "Thank you," Kale Thorne said, accepting the cup. He had learned to tolerate coffee during his time on Earth, though he still found it too strong. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "What happens now?" Morgan finally asked. Kale Thorne considered the question. Now we see if my faith in humanity was justified. You have your chance to prove yourselves. Do not waste it. We won't, Morgan promised. We're good at rising to challenges. Yes, Cale Thorne agreed. That is what concerns some species and gives others hope. He took a sip of coffee and made a slight face at the bitterness. But I believe hope will win. Humans have shown me that even the darkest past does not determine the future. You choose, every day, to be better than you were. That choice is what makes you remarkable. Ambassador Morgan smiled. Thank you, Cale Thorne. For everything. For understanding us. For speaking for us. For giving us this chance. Thank me by succeeding, he replied. Show the galaxy that humans can be trusted. Prove that compassion and strength can coexist. Become the species I believe you can be. We will, Morgan said with absolute certainty. Because that's what humans do. We persist. We adapt. We overcome. And we never, ever, give up. Cale Thorne raised his coffee cup in a human toast gesture. To humanity's future, whatever it may be. Morgan clinked her cup against his. To friendship between species, no matter how different we are. They drank together, human and Viridian, looking out at the vast galaxy they would now share, more fully than ever before. The stars shone eternal and unchanged, but everything else was about to transform. Humanity had been accepted, integrated, and given responsibility. Only time would tell if Cale Thorne's faith was justified. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be quite the same again. Rehumans feel threatened and respond accordingly. I know which future I prefer. The question is, which future do you prefer? The chamber erupted in discussion again. Delegates argued, debated, and consulted with their home governments. Cale Thorne watched it all, satisfied that he had delivered his message clearly. The decision now belonged to the Federation as a whole. He looked at Ambassador Morgan and Commander Bennett, these representatives of a young and dangerous species. He saw hope in their eyes, but also determination. They would accept friendship, but they would survive rejection. That was the essence of humanity, he realized. They hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. They offered peace, but were ready for war. They were a contradiction, a paradox, a species that defied easy categorization. And that, perhaps, was what the galaxy needed most. A species that refused to be defined by others' expectations, that insisted on forging their own path, that combined compassion with strength in equal measure. Oh, question authority, and think critically about right and wrong. The image changed to show human soldiers in training, but they are also taught that sometimes violence is necessary, that protecting the innocent may require fighting, that there are things worth dying for. They hold both truths simultaneously, the value of peace and the necessity of being prepared for war. Cale Thorne looked around the chamber. This makes humans unpredictable by our standards. They will negotiate in good faith and follow agreements to the letter. But if you betray their trust, if you harm those under their protection, they become something else entirely. They become relentless. Commander Bennett added quietly, "We have another saying. Walk softly and carry a big stick. We prefer diplomacy, but we are always ready for alternatives. Hey have developed more peace treaties, more diplomatic protocols, and more conflict resolution systems than any other species in the Federation. But they prepare for war while hoping for peace." Ambassador Morgan nodded. "We have a saying on Earth. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. We do not want conflicts, but we refuse to be helpless if conflicts come." Cale Thorne brought up one final image. It showed a human child learning to walk, falling down, getting back up, falling again, and repeating the process over and over. "This is perhaps the perfect metaphor for humanity," he said. They fall, they get up, they fail, they try again, they face impossible odds, and they persist. This is not stubbornness or foolishness. It is their fundamental nature. They are a species that simply does not know how to quit. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this information. Many of them were beginning to understand why humanity caused so much concern despite their relatively limited power. Nence. The ability to assign value beyond mere survival and reproduction. The courage to care about things that do not benefit you directly. He looked directly at Ambassador Morgan. Humans are dangerous. Yes, but not because they are predators. They are dangerous because they are predators who have learned to love. They are killers who choose mercy. They are capable of terrible violence, but prefer peace. This combination makes them utterly unpredictable by our normal standards. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates argued that this made humans more dangerous. Others suggested it made them valuable allies. A few insisted that more study was needed, and they will shape our future whether we like it or not. The only question is whether we will shape that future together, or whether we will force them to face it alone. Commander Bennett felt a chill run down his spine. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 20 years. He had fought in the Raxian conflict, and helped establish colonies on hostile worlds. He knew what humanity was capable of, both good and bad. The fact that Cale Thorne understood this, that he was willing to speak honestly about it, gave Bennett hope. "Let me tell you what I learned," Cale Thorne said. "Let me show you why humans inspire fear, and why that fear may be both justified and completely misplaced. Let me reveal the truth about the species that has, in just 15 years, become the most discussed topic in our ancient Federation." The holographic displays around him shifted one final time, showing images of humans doing ordinary things. Working, laughing, playing with children, helping strangers, simple moments that every species could recognize and understand. Because the truth about humans, Cale Thorne said softly, is far more complex and far more important than any of us realized.